Imagine a world where the internet never existed. No Google, no social media, no streaming services, no online shopping, and no instant messaging. The internet is so deeply woven into the fabric of our daily lives that it's hard to picture life without it. Yet, what if, for some reason, this revolutionary technology never came to be? What if the invention that transformed communication, entertainment, business, and almost every aspect of modern life was nothing more than a sci-fi dream? Today, we're taking you on a journey into an alternate history, exploring what life would look like in a world where the internet never existed and how it would shape our society and our futures in surprising and dramatic ways. Let's start with the basics: communication and information. Without the internet, our primary forms of communication would still include landline phones, handwritten letters, and in-person conversations. The concept of instantaneous global communication would be limited to traditional means like telegraphs or fax machines, and even then, it wouldn't come close to the ease or speed of email, messaging apps, or social media. Staying in touch with people would be more challenging, especially for those living in different cities or countries. For example, long-distance relationships, both personal and professional, would require much more effort to maintain. You'd likely call someone long distance on a fixed schedule, writing frequent letters to fill the gaps in between. The romanticized notion of letter writing might actually come back into vogue, with people pouring their hearts onto paper instead of quickly sending text messages. News would travel at a snail's pace compared to today. Without online news outlets and social media platforms, information about world events wouldn't reach the public for days or even weeks. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and TV news would still dominate the media landscape. Imagine waiting for the evening news or the morning paper to learn about major events, a return to a time when people would discuss yesterday's headlines, not today's breaking stories. It would take longer for world-changing events to spread, leading to delays in the public's awareness and reactions to them. Think about everyday tasks like finding directions, checking the weather, or learning a new skill. Without search engines, GPS, and online tutorials, these activities would involve much more effort. Instead of asking Google, you'd rely on physical maps, travel guides, or printed reference materials like encyclopedias. If you wanted to learn how to fix a leaky faucet or cook a new recipe, you'd likely turn to a library book or seek advice from a local expert rather than watching a quick YouTube tutorial. This would make information feel more valuable, but also more exclusive, as access would be limited by geography, resources, and individual networks of expertise. Now, let's shift to entertainment. A world without the internet would mean no streaming services like Netflix or Disney+, no YouTube for endless hours of content, and no TikTok or Instagram reels to scroll through for quick laughs. Instead, TV would still reign supreme. Families would gather around at specific times to catch their favorite shows, and if you missed an episode, you'd have to wait for a rerun or the release of a VHS or DVD. Appointment viewing, where you had to tune in at a scheduled time, would still be the norm. Movie theaters would see a different fate. Without the convenience of streaming services, people would be more inclined to visit the cinema for the latest films, potentially boosting box office revenues. Likewise, video rental stores like the once ubiquitous Blockbuster would still be thriving as hubs for weekend movie plans, complete with that special trip to pick out the perfect movie. There'd be a tactile charm to browsing the aisles, reading the backs of DVD cases, and arguing with friends about which movie to rent. Gaming too would take on a different character. In a world without online multiplayer modes, gamers would gather in living rooms to play together, relying on split-screen modes or taking turns. The rise of competitive gaming, or esports, might have never taken off in the way it has today. Without the infrastructure for live streaming tournaments or forming online gaming communities, it's unlikely that gaming would have reached its current cultural status as a spectator sport. Instead, local arcades could still be popular hangouts where players compete for high scores and bragging rights. Music consumption would look different as well. Without streaming services like Spotify or Apple Music, we'd still rely on physical formats: CDs, vinyl records, and cassette tapes. Record stores would remain central to music discovery, and discovering new artists would depend on radio DJs, recommendations from friends, or even live performances. Music would circulate more slowly, and trends in genres would take longer to develop and spread. The kind of overnight sensation that we often see on platforms like YouTube wouldn't happen because there would be no viral videos or instant sharing to accelerate their rise to fame. What about social interaction? Well, without the internet, we'd undoubtedly see more face-to-face connections. People would be more likely to pick up the phone or meet up in person rather than sending a quick text or social media message. Friendships and relationships might feel more intentional because they'd require more effort to maintain. Imagine calling someone up for a spontaneous coffee date instead of sending them a "let's catch up soon" message that could languish indefinitely in your chat history. At the same time, social circles would be smaller and more geographically bound. The idea of having friends scattered across the globe or joining online communities based on niche interests wouldn't exist. Social networks would be limited to people in your town, workplace, or social club, making it harder to connect with those who share uncommon hobbies, interests, or experiences. The internet has enabled people to find others who are their kind of weird across the world, and without it, forming communities around niche interests would be much more challenging. The absence of social media would also eliminate the always-on nature of digital communication, potentially reducing feelings of anxiety or pressure to constantly present a curated version of oneself online. However, the downsides would include the loss of platforms for social movements and activism. Awareness campaigns, social justice movements, and grassroots fundraising efforts would be much more difficult to organize without social networks to spread the word. Organizing protests or spreading news about injustices would be largely confined to physical spaces, community meetings, rallies, and printed flyers. The business landscape would be transformed in profound ways. Without e-commerce, brick-and-mortar stores would remain the primary way to shop. There would be no Amazon, no eBay, no Etsy. The global marketplace would feel much smaller because businesses would struggle to reach customers beyond their local areas. The convenience of ordering products from around the world and having them shipped to your doorstep wouldn't exist. We'd all be more familiar with the idea of shopping local, out of necessity rather than choice. Marketing would also take on a different character. Traditional advertising methods, billboards, television commercials, and print ads would dominate, with companies investing heavily in these channels to get the word out about their products. The idea of viral marketing wouldn't exist because there'd be no social media to amplify brand messages organically. Businesses would rely much more on word-of-mouth recommendations and reputation within the local community. Without online banking and digital payments, transactions would be slower, with cash and checks remaining the primary forms of payment. Credit cards would still be around, but without the convenience of mobile payments or online transfers. Managing finances would involve more paperwork, and balancing a checkbook would still be a common skill. Banking would remain a more personal experience, with people regularly visiting physical branches for even simple transactions. Education would experience some of the most significant changes. Without the internet, learning would be largely confined to traditional classroom settings. Universities and schools would still be the primary gatekeepers of knowledge, with physical textbooks, printed journals, and in-person lectures dominating the educational landscape. Online learning wouldn't exist, which means self-directed study or distance education would be far less accessible. In fact, education would be more centralized, and resources for self-learning would be scarcer. Students would rely on physical libraries and encyclopedias to complete research, and the idea of pulling up thousands of scholarly articles in a matter of seconds would sound like science fiction. Think about how differently that would affect the pursuit of hobbies, career skills, and specialized knowledge. For example, learning how to code, picking up a new language, or mastering a musical instrument would require finding a local class or private instructor. Now, what about innovation? The internet has played a huge role in accelerating technological development by enabling global collaboration and access to information. Without it, Progress in fields like software development, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology would be significantly slower. Researchers and inventors wouldn't have access to the vast databases of knowledge and open-source software that drive innovation today. The tech industry might focus more on physical products rather than digital experiences. Companies like Google, Amazon, and Facebook wouldn't exist in their current forms, and the tech boom that drove Silicon Valley's rise might have played out in an entirely different way. Startups would face more barriers to entry since they couldn't reach a global audience with a few clicks or leverage online crowdfunding to secure initial investments. The world might look more like it did in the 1970s or 1980s, hardware-centric, with a focus on manufacturing and physical goods. For instance, robotics might progress more slowly due to limited collaboration opportunities. Advances in healthcare and science could also lag, as researchers would have to rely on slower, more traditional methods of sharing findings, such as printed journals and conferences. Culturally, without the internet, we'd live in a more localized world. While globalization would still occur through trade, travel, and traditional media, cultural exchange would happen at a much slower rate. Music, fashion, art, and social trends would spread more regionally, and it would take years for certain cultural movements to cross borders. The internet has allowed people to share cultural elements almost instantaneously, creating a global village where trends can be adopted worldwide within days. Without this connection, cultural distinctions would be more pronounced. You might find that the slang, style, and even food of one region could feel far more unique compared to another, even within the same country. Social movements, too, would be more locally focused. The ability to mobilize millions of people across the globe for a cause would be much harder without digital tools. Protests, petitions, and awareness campaigns would be primarily physical efforts, requiring more time and resources to organize. This might lead to a different form of activism, perhaps more grounded and community-focused, but also limited in reach. In the end, a world without the internet would be different in almost every aspect of life. It's a world that might seem simpler, more face-to-face conversations, less digital distraction, and a slower pace of life. But it would also be a world of limitations where opportunities are less accessible, information is harder to come by, and the barriers to global communication and innovation are much higher. The internet has connected us, empowered us, and changed the course of history. While it's easy to criticize its downsides, from misinformation to privacy concerns, it's also important to recognize the countless ways it has shaped our society for the better. So would a world without the internet be a simpler and better place, or would it be too constrained, limiting the growth and potential we've come to know? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more thought-provoking discussions like this one.